Hello, Nikita.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I know you're going to ask that question. I'm never ready to reply how I'm doing.
No
How are you?
reply is expected. In America, Nikita, we just say, I'm doing great, whether we mean it or not. So you can just say that.
There's a movie that encapsulated a lot of like national myths, including the kind of anti-American sentiment in Russia from years and years ago, called Brother 2. And one of the famous scenes there is, a lot of the movie takes place in America. And one of the scenes is this guy asks a Russian who's been in America for a long time. He's like, what do these words, how are you, mean? And she goes, they're asking how you're doing. He's like, is everybody interested in how I'm doing? And the response is like, no, it's just
No.
Просто так, it's for nothing. Here, everything's for nothing except for money.
Oh, now that's not nice. That's not nice. I was hoping we could start off on a less bitterly tribal note, Nikita. So anyway, let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of Nonzero newsletter. This is the Nonzero podcast. You are Nikita Petrov, publisher of the Psychopolitica newsletter. You are familiar to some people in our audience, and you're about to become familiar to more because, some years ago you were an active member of the Nonzero team. Now you're going to become one again. And some of that, the work you do is going to be behind the scenes, but some of it's going to be visible, including podcasts that you and I are going to do at least a couple times a month.
Mm-hmm.
And they may get a little experimental in form. We may try live streams and so on. And in fact, we're going to be experimenting more broadly with stuff on the Nonzero platform, newsletter and podcasting platform. And later, you and I are going to be talking about that. About some ideas we have and encouraging people to contribute their own ideas and give us feedback and so on. But we were going to start off talking about Trump and Putin, and in particular, the question of whether Trump is kind of becoming Putin, I guess mainly in the sense of whether there's a real chance that the U.S. by the end of Trump's term, which we expect to be his last term, could be much closer to Russia in terms of how authoritarian it is, but also look into some, personal comparisons between Trump and Putin, their style of politics and even their personalities, maybe. But before we get into that, maybe you could tell us how you became a leading expert on Russia, Nikita.
Yeah, I'm now expert, but I was born in Russia. I lived in Russia most of my life. I left when the war started with Ukraine, like a few weeks, 2-3 weeks after. Came back a couple of times because I had to, and then I haven't been there since autumn of 2022. But I have my family there. My wife goes there like 4 times a week. I have friends. And
4 times a week. That's a lot, Nikita. You sure you mean that?
4 times a year. I apologize.
Uh.
Still a little excessive to my taste. But yeah, the connection is there. And then it's also, whether you want or not, you are connected to the state that gave you your passport. I mean, I can't get on a plane without showing my ID. I can't have a Spanish ID unless I have the Russian ID. My Spanish ID
and
says...
you're in Spain now, right?
I'm in Spain now, yeah. And the Spanish card that I have does say nationality Russian, and that was enough reason for a particular bank to decline service.
Really?
I was so excited when I got it was a whole bureaucratic process of getting the visa, then flying to the country to apply for this longer term status nomad visa. And then I finally got it, and I got this little ID thing, and I thought I'm going to go to a bank and open a bank account. And the guy said, with this nationality, I don't think it's going to work. And it was just like so upfront, so surprising that I was like, oh, I guess not. Turns out you just need to go to a different bank, right? Different standards.
Well, when we did all these sanctions, you're exactly the kind of oligarch we had in mind. So naturally, you were caught up in the dragnet, Nikita. But no. So apparently, this was just like this bank was kind of going overboard.
Well, I don't know about all of the different banks, but this one definitely never opens accounts to Russians since the
I see.
sanctions. And there's
Yeah.
another one that I was instructed to try this one. If it doesn't work, try the same but a different branch, and then just go from one office to another until you find the clerk that's going to be fine with it. And I was lucky. I found on the first try online even they didn't care.
Okay. Well, that's good. So yeah. So you are an authority of sorts on Russia. You know a lot more about it than I do, and than a lot of people do. And actually, you know a lot of things about it that even some people who are technically experts at think tanks in America, uh, some of them probably don't have the same kind of distinctive vantage point you've had. So let me set the stage. I mean, obviously, there are concerns about Trump's authoritarian inclinations. As it happens, the Wall Street Journal only yesterday published a piece that is headlined in Trump's second term, a bolder president charges ahead unchecked. The subhead is Trump is frequently riffing on authoritarianism and ignoring caution from advisors. Now, I just want to read a little of the piece. So, first of all, here's a sentence. In recent days, and bear in mind, this is just recent days, okay? In recent days, Trump renewed a call to end mail in voting, announced a new policy of coercing local governments into abandoning cashless bail policies, threatened to send the military to Baltimore, and said he'd like to send it to New York and Chicago as well, all of which pushes the bounds of his authority. In one of the most aggressive steps yet in that direction, he tried to remove Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook from her post on Monday, setting up a conflict with the Supreme Court, blah, blah, blah. Also on Monday, Trump said, quote, a lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator. Then he said, I don't like a dictator. I'm not a dictator. No, just throwing that out there. It's like brilliant Overton window kind of surgery there. He's like, everybody wants a dictator, but I'm not going that far. So however far I do go is fine. So and then one more paragraph. There's just so much stuff. This is a slightly, I'm going to expand the time frame a little. Since taking office in January, Trump has threatened and extracted expansive settlements from top universities, law firms, tech and media companies. He sent U.S. Marines to Los Angeles over the objection of local elected officials, took over Washington's police force. Yeah, we mentioned that. Ordering thousands of troops and federal officers into the streets. He fired the economics official who produced a monthly jobs report that irked him, ordered the firing of career officials at agencies, and even sought to fire officials at institutions he doesn't technically run, including the National Portrait Gallery. I mean, that's so perfect. Like caring about the national, because after all, there will be a portrait of him there. Few aides have pushed back on any of the moves, and he has often been cheered on. So, for starters, Nikita, I'm wondering, how does all this look to you? Like hauntingly familiar, or less hauntingly familiar, or what? Or not familiar?
Also, so we exchanged a few emails about this in preparation, and I tried to make the point. The contexts are different. The systems in which Putin rose to power and in which Trump rose to power are different. And so, the things you mentioned over email as the most obvious signs of moving towards authoritarianism is National Guard and the intimidation of the media, intimidation of the colleges. So
I happen to mention those. Yeah, there's a lot you could put at that level, but yeah, those are. Yeah.
So with these three, at a certain level of abstraction, so if I say taking control of the street, of the media, of the courts, those are obviously things that Putin has done. That's completed, took time, started very early on. One of the first moves that he did was going against a TV channel that was known for its like journalistic. It was like the most kind of well-known, popular investigative journalistic team. And now, as soon as he got into power, I think like half a year later, that channel was no more. And then the team moved to another channel, and then that channel was no more. And so it started early on, but then there's a gradual process, and now it's completed. The difference is Putin appeared as on the national stage as like president-elect, basically. Like he was prime minister for a little bit before then, and then became not president-elect, acting president, right? So like Yeltsin stepped down voluntarily and gave the reins to him. And so Putin from the get-go is the personification of the state. And before that, he was, a KGB agent. So it's like deep state personalized. And so all of these moves, it was not like Putin never sued anybody, and it would be totally out of character, outside of his role, to, as a private individual, as a citizen, go and sue somebody for defamation or for something like that. He's acting as a representative of the state, as a kind of a bureaucrat, and the control that he was taking, he was not taking it personally. He was expanding the reach of the executive branch, you could say, or the state broadly, when the state goes after independent media. So if you say controlling the streets, the media, the education system, and these moves that Trump's are doing now are steps towards that, then it's very familiar. At the same time, like suing or threatening to sue a media enterprise is totally outside of like a Russian president. I don't think Yeltsin ever did it. I don't think that's like in the toolkit that they would even consider, because they're above that. So I feel like Trump is, at this point, maybe like he's moving towards something else, and maybe it's not him who's going to be the actual like autocrat. Maybe is the guy who comes next, using the expanded powers of the executive branch that Trump will now provide. But it's moves in that direction, maybe, but not quite. Not quite at the same level.
It's interesting. As for Trump, like, filing or threatening lawsuits, I mean, there's been an interesting kind of conflation of Trump, the business person, and Trump, the politician. Putin had never been a business person.
Right.
But, I mean, a good example is, I guess now the government is going to take a 10% stake in Intel. And, whoa, that's like not something we used to do. And it's very... I mean, I tend to think of Mussolini first, like just or kind of China. I mean, it's a statist capitalism,
right?
And I wondered when he did that. Like some of the things Trump does, you think, well, yeah, he's thinking I'm this politician who wants more power. But sometimes, and a similar thing was, by the way, when he said that the government should get 15% of NVIDIA's sales of H20s to China or whatever, because he's the one who relaxed the controls that let NVIDIA do that. And in both cases, you wonder, is this just the private sector Trump's instincts at work? Like, I gave you something, I got to get a piece of the action. And since I recognize I'm the president, so I can't be overt about money coming to me. Of course, there are various senses in which he's just personally corrupt and money is coming to him. But in these cases, you can't be that open about it. So the money should go to the government. And I wonder if, with Trump, a perennial question is, to what extent is he thinking it through? Whereas with Putin, it seems pretty clear. He's always thinking it through, right? And Trump more often seems to be going on instinct. I would... One more thing I'd say is that, when you mentioned that Putin has done this gradually, that might surprise some people, because they don't think of Russia as ever having been really like us. And it's true that they did not have in place well-established institutions of liberal
Yeah.
democracy. And that's a challenge Trump faces that Putin didn't. But though people may forget, and some people are too young to remember, when Putin took over, and I think he was anointed on New Year's Eve of 2000 or something,
Yeah.
when Yeltsin made the big speech, and it was the idea was Russia was this democracy. They were still, accepting the idea that, yeah, we're going to be like the West. We're going to get this Western assistance. We're even going to follow your economic prescription, which, although by that time they'd probably soured on that because the 90s were very painful. But so Putin didn't have to erode and destroy whole institutions and long-standing norms the way, which is what Trump confronts. But he did have to talk the talk of liberal democracy for a while, and there was real liberalism that no longer exists. For example, with the media, as you say. So I don't know which of those you want to pick up on, like Putin being so much more deliberate and seemingly explicitly strategic than Trump, and less mercurial and impulsive, or the sense in which Russia ever was a democracy.
Well, so on Russia, whether Russia was a democracy, Russia was a young democracy and flawed and troubled to begin with. I mean, Putin comes at the end of 1999. That's what 91 is when the previous country collapsed. 93 is when there's a constitutional crisis, and it's not clear whether the communist parliament or the capitalist president is really in charge, and that's resolved by using tanks. Like the building of the parliament is in smoke, and there's like a kind of tiny little civil war in the streets of Moscow for a few days. And whether the 96 election was fair, I think most people agree it wasn't, including the people who, the class of people that got into power, retained the power in 96. And there are economic hardships throughout, and there's a war with Chechnya. And so it's like Putin comes in. I spent a couple of days, like half a year ago or something, looking at early Putin videos, and I realized I misremember him completely. I got him. I was born in 88, so early Putin is like I'm 11, 12. But I got this image of him that I guess it's like the liberal opposition painted him this way, as a faceless bureaucrat guy, no charisma. Who is this guy even to begin with? Blank face, not a lot of intonation, etc. And I watched these early videos, and he was very compelling and persuasive, and is operating in a totally different context from today. There's this interview that he's doing with the leading journalist, like from several channels. I forget, maybe channels in the newspaper or something, but I think it's 3 people. They sit tightly around a small table. Now he has very, very long tables. There was a period of very long tables during COVID. But they sit like really face to face, and they're asking him questions, and they're reasonably hard, but it's not even that they're hard. It's like they're real. Like they all are very concerned about the state of the country, because it's just 8 years, 9 years since the Soviet Union collapsed. 98 is an economic crisis that I remember, where prices skyrocketed in a day or two. I remember price tags in stores being not in rubles, but because you can't do dollars, like that's illegal to show it in dollars, it was units. It was условные единицы. Because you can't make it in rubles, because the price should be changed tomorrow when ruble plummets even further. And there was the war with Chechnya, which, the first one, and now the next one is soon going to happen. So the country is in a crisis, and president by the end of his tenure is barely talking, like he's struggling physically. So they pose to him questions like, how are you going to solve this? How are you going to solve that? And you can feel the real kind of concern in their tones. And he comes across as a strong, competent
Hmm.
person who's going to
Hmm.
sort shit out. Uh, and he's a little combative with them, but kind of like more on the level. He's not like at the top, the kind of Tsar
Right.
figure talking down to the plebs. There's a moment about Kadyrov, this is the head of Chechnya, and I don't really know the context around that particular exchange, but it was like Kadyrov was just made the leader of Chechnya, and I guess the reporter is pointing to how chaotic the situation is, and they're not what's going to happen. And Kadyrov fought
Hmm.
on the side of the separatists in the first war, and so they say, so who is in charge of Chechnya? And Putin like misses a bit and looks at the person sternly in the eyes, and he says the word Kadyrov with a kind of emphasis. It's like, do you have any doubt? It's Kadyrov. And so he is this hands-on guy who's now gonna sort things out. Um, that is to say, he's not coming in to lead either a democracy with established institutions that have been around for more than 10 years, nor he's leading a country that's doing okay. Nobody,
Yeah.
when Putin comes to power, thinks, we're basically doing okay. We just need to do a little more of the same. The country is in crisis and has been in crisis since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So again,
Yeah.
the context is very different. And I wonder whether by the time Trump is done, the feeling is going to be more like that in the US. Like now, a lot of the norms are being uh, shaken and broken. And I often don't know whether, this thing that he does that hasn't been done before, whether it's a norm being broken or an actual law being
Well,
broken.
that that's a critical point. I mean, I think one thing we've learned with Trump is how much of the limitations on executive power had been normative,
Hmm.
and how many things in general had been normative, and it was the respect for the norms that had kept things more or less stable. I mean, one example, this isn't executive power per se, although Trump did initiate this, is now we have this controversy over gerrymandering. Trump said he wanted Texas to do their reapportionment of seats in a way that would create, in effect, more Republican seats in Congress. This is something states do, but they've always done it once every 10 years, I gather, because that's when the census happens. But now I also gather this was just a norm, and yet it's such an important norm because now you're going to have a situation where, although California is retaliating and they're going to create some Democratic seats, it looks like the Republicans are going to win this reapportionment battle unless something derails it entirely. And that may be the reason they hang on to the House in the midterms. Traditionally, in the midterm election, whichever party holds the White House does badly in Congress,
Hmm.
especially I think the House. And the expectation was the Democrats had a real shot at taking control of the House. Less so the Senate, but they had a shot at the House. That's important because, uh, well, first of all, it's easier to stymie legislation Trump wants, but also they can hold hearings and they can bring transparency to corrupt stuff he's doing. Although, honestly, in a society this polarized, I don't know how much this stuff matters anymore. But still, this is going to deeply embitter a lot of Democrats. I mean, it's kind of reminiscent of back when Mitch McConnell said, "No, we're not going to." I know there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court, but we're going to just refuse to even talk about it in the Senate, so Obama can't fill it. That was a violation of a norm that deeply embittered people. This is going to be another one, and you just realize in so many respects how much it's been norms, not laws, that have kept things on an even keel. The other thing I'd say, which is related, is how often legislation that is supposed to constrain the president just was too damn vague. I mean, it's like right now, this thing with this member of the Fed board he wants to fire. The law reads that the president can only fire them, quote, for cause. It doesn't say who gets to determine what cause is. And so Trump says there's cause. I think on some, in 1 year, maybe for different mortgage applications, she listed 2 different residences as her primary residence or something. And I don't know if this turns out to be true, which I don't think he's demonstrated. He'll say that's cause. And you just realize, like, they should never have done this. The same goes with, like, when he fired the inspector general. There's this vague wording, but nobody what's an emergency, right? He says, well, I have to national, he can nationalize the National Guard, which I think he's already done in the case of LA, probably, and in times of emergency. Well, if the president gets to decide what an emergency is, that's like no constraint at all in actual legal terms.
Right.
So anyway, I'm wondering one thing. I'm wondering in the Russia case, how much of it was that? Were there things that, again, the norms just weren't so long established, right? Because the Soviet Union had only fallen apart in the early 90s. And so, but I'm wondering how often, if at all, you thought, Putin consolidates power. And sometimes I guess he did it by succeeding in passing legislation. I know at one point he took power away from the governors somehow. And
that was kind of like an emergency thing. So he tied it to, there was a terrorist attack in Beslan when terrorists, Chechen separatists took over a school and kept a lot of kids and people hostage. And after that, Putin somehow like tied that. So, these are hard times. We can't really, I guess, like the governors were supposed to take better, control of their territories and they're not up to snuff. So removing elections of governors.
Was that something where you didn't realize he had the legal authority? Maybe didn't, but it was like more of a norm.
Honestly, I don't know. Like I was probably my early teens.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the legal part of that. But the clearest example of the kind of thing you're talking about with the vagueness of formulations is just him coming back for a third term. Because the Constitution says no person can serve more than 2 times in a row. And the way I remember, everybody thought that just means no more than 2 terms. And he's like, I'm going to step away for a term.
This particular example is making me very uneasy, Nikita, for reasons you can imagine. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's also just these great. So, let me ask you a question about the lawfare in the U.S. So, looking from afar and not really knowing how things work, I haven't watched many American movies that establish that America is this beautiful place with checks and balances and the separate branches of government and all that. Just kind of to contrast that the judiciary is independent. And then before Trump got reelected, I'm not really watching carefully, but I see the cases levied against him. And I hear some people saying, well, this is ludicrous. This case is, made out of nothing. And since I'm not an expert in any of this, I can't really decide whether what I'm seeing is like what the cases that Navalny had thrown at him, which were really ludicrous. And it was the state targeting a political opponent of the people currently in charge. Or it's like, well, there's corruption. I mean, he did whatever was illegal. And so that was just like me watching from afar and not knowing which is the case. But now, I think it was like yesterday or the day before, he won on appeal in one of these cases. And it strikes me as something to know that he lost it when he was not in power, and then he won on appeal when he is in power. And that leads me to think that maybe the judiciary is independent in that there's not a direct control. Nobody can call a judge and say, here's your verdict. But maybe it's flexible enough, pliable enough for the judge to know what's best for him when he's making these decisions. Like how do you make sure that that the judiciary stays independent and not moves along with the zeitgeist?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar as I should be with the case you're talking about, but I'd say two things. First of all, the one I think continuing piece of relatively good news is that I don't think Trump has yet flagrantly defied a court order. There have been a couple of blurry cases, like the one where the judge said, and if there are planes in midair, they should turn back or whatever. But okay, but they'd taken off, and Trump can say, oh gosh, couldn't communicate with them, or whatever the hell he said. I think ultimately he has complied with court rulings. And I think there's a majority in the Supreme Court that is mindful of the threat he poses, frankly. On the other hand, there's also a majority in the Supreme Court that is historically committed, ideologically committed to an expansive conception of executive power. And I think one big question is he behaving so scarily and irresponsibly that they may actually rule, they may actually dictate a narrower conception of executive power than they would have, if you had asked them a couple of years ago. I don't know what the deal is on that. Now, the question you're asking, does the rule of law, kind of work, or judges? There's two basic ways judges can become judges. They can become appointed. They can be appointed, or they can be elected. And the elected cases tend to be like local or state, and it varies by state and locality. Those are two different kinds of incentive structures. Now, the appointments are often for life. I think. Obviously, Supreme Court. I think all the federal judges are appointed for life, and so that insulates them from a certain kind of political consideration, right? And now they are all appointed by one party, by somebody in one party or the other, and that obviously, this is one reason. It would be nice for Democrats to get control of the Senate in the midterms, because the Senate has to approve federal appointments, and Trump, this time much more than last, is just trying to load the dice in every way possible. I think last time around he let this, what's the name of this conservative judicial activist group that Republican presidents take advice from? He just let them pick the judges, I think. I suspect this time around with federal judges, he's being a lot more tactical, and it's pretty clear that one of his main criteria, if not his main criterion, judging by the way he's handling executive branch appointments, is loyalty to him and willingness to, willingness to subvert democracy on his behalf. these people will just do anything for him. And so anyway, the judges enter office with a political leaning and an ideological leaning. Often, they are people who have sometimes they've been kind of political activists, even as well as being, judges or lawyers, whatever. But thereafter, they are insulated from political consideration in strictly career terms. And there have been some big surprises, especially on the Supreme Court. So, like the Warren Court, I think, Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren, I believe. And then Warren, I guess, went off the reservation from Eisenhower's point of view. He was part of some very liberal rulings, and there's been a certain amount of that. So I think that's all good, that they're not entirely predictable. By the way, just an asterisk, there's one kind of ominous thing about the way we talk about judges now. And this is a new thing that started in Trump's first term, which is that, mainstream elite media, they would talk about a ruling that was either in favor of Trump or against Trump or whatever, and they would mention that the judge had been a Republican appointed judge or a Democratic appointed judge. The media did not used to report that. I mean, it was always there. It was always, there was always a political identity in that sense. But the fact, I think, first of all, it's bad because it revs people up. Like, they read the story and they go, oh, that judge is just doing that because of that. And the other thing is just like democracy, the rule of law, a certain amount of mythology is required to keep it going. And like the myth of the neutral judge, right? I don't mean we all have to believe that, but I'm not sure it's a good thing to be calling it into question all the time by identifying in the media like Democratic appointed judge, Republican appointed, and every school child reads that, right? And so right away they're thinking, oh, so this is all bullshit, right? And yes, in a certain sense it's bullshit, but in a certain sense, if you think of it as bullshit, it becomes more bullshit. And so I think that's not a good sign. And I doubt that has any counterpart in Russia, that particular thing. But there is actually, you can say whatever you want in response to this, but there is an interesting question as to what extent, maybe even in Soviet times, there was a sense of obligation to at least go through what were technically the proper channels, right? With the courts.
There were elections.
Yeah.
People went and voted for the person. I think oftentimes there's just one person on the ballot, but
and there were courts, and things went through the courts, and there were rulings, and and of course there was also criminal court. But anyway, I don't know what all that leads to, but there's just so many signs that our system is eroding, and that last one is one of them. Again, I don't think that has a counterpart in Russia, but
so this connects to your question about like Trump the businessman and Trump the politician, and which is acting. And my feeling is, this is totally intuitive just from what he says and the way he speaks. He talks about the game. He says, basically, there's a game, and a certain number of people are playing it at a very high level, and I'm one of those people. And I feel like this game is not politics or business or media or any particular dimension. It's just the game. It's winning and losing in life. And it seems to me that his like modus operandi is, I'm gonna try to win. And like, you find out the limits of your power by testing them. You find out the limits of your influence by testing them. You sue anybody and you see whether you can win. And the same, I think, applies in politics. And, can he annex Canada? People don't think he can, but why not aim high? And I this my evolution of my like views of America. Not that I'm confident in them, but I've experienced this over the past few years. This shifting from this idea that, again, like anybody who's watched enough American movies, you're very good at making the system feel like it's really functioning, and by the time you finish a court drama and the attorney finishes his speech played by Edward Norton or somebody, you almost want to stand up and salute the flag, because it's so about the free speech and the values on which this country is built. And so I had this image of a system that was designed from the get-go by the founding fathers, and then evolved, and there were amendments and this and that, and the struggles around it. But it's basically, there's a design that is working. And the more I've watched Trump, the more I feel like maybe the causal relationship is reverse. It's what we call this system is what you end up with when you just have a lot of different actors battling it out. And so Trump is, if you look at him as just one actor within this very complex, I don't even want to say system, like environment. There are many competing forces in this environment: political forces, business forces, technology, media. And everybody, in Trump's view, it feels like to me, everybody's just trying to win. And he's going to try to win as much as he can. Now that he's the president, for him winning and for America to win is, he probably thinks it's the same thing. America is, like, the way he talks about America, it's the hot country right now. It's like he talks about the country as a property, a business. It's like it's trending right now.
Yeah, it's funny. I think, he encourages, he revels in a kind of cynical view of the world. Certainly, foreign policy, he's like, no, there are no rules. It's like the most powerful nation gets to do whatever they want. Like that's his foreign policy. And I think you're right that he transports that perspective into the way he talks about life generally and domestic politics generally. And I think that's been part of his appeal in a way. I mean, for starters, I think by the time he showed up in 2016, there was enough cynicism about politicians generally that the fact that he spoke more crudely than an American politician was appealing, because they thought, well, then he's not a regular politician. And then the fact that he speaks so cynically, I mean, again, if we've already become cynical about our politics and he's speaking cynically, it's like, yeah, he gets it. It's like, this is all bullshit. Better to at least have somebody who's leveling with you about that. I would say, by the way, that, you mentioned American movies, kind of implicitly, propagandizing us. I mean, I think you're familiar with this joke, right? An American and a Russian sitting next to each other on a plane that's coming over to America, and American says, "What are you going to do in America?" He says, "Well, I'm a scholar and I study propaganda, and I'm going to study American propaganda." And the American says, "What propaganda?" And the Russian says, "That's what I mean." In other words, like,
exactly,
we have this. It's not as overt as, but anyway, I'm kind of wondering, how does that compare with Putin? Like, does he convey a more cynical worldview than, say, Yeltsin did, or than some of the people who 20 years ago might have hoped to compete with him on the political stage? Or is he, doing the, and I will say, Trump, there are times when he's appealing to patriotism and stuff. There's no doubt about it. But on balance, I think it's a more frankly cynical view of the world, and a more kind of social Darwinist view of the world, and a darker view of the world than we're accustomed to hearing from our politicians. how would you say all that compares with Putin? Is like rhetorical cynicism like part of his modus operandi?
So rhetorically, he's very broad. We've seen many different kinds of Putin, and some are like retired, and others come back depending on the circumstance. And he can soothe you with just talking a lot. And like one of these favorite phrases there, you can find a montage of him saying, "It has to be within the bounds of the law," and it's his answer to whatever it is. Like there are protests in the streets, and I don't know, people were beaten up, and the journalist is asking about that. He says, "Listen, there's nothing wrong with protesting for your beliefs. It's just it has to be within the bounds of the law." And then what exactly that means, I mean, he's gonna always say that the police did it within the law, and if they did something against the protester, then the protester broke some law. And in this particular conference, it's not going to be addressed further and interrogated further. But I wanted to say, so we're talking Putin's more methodical, Trump is working more from the gut. I think at the kind of international level, at the level of geopolitics, I think they might be arriving at the same worldview, at least the way it seems to me, of like great powers with spheres of influence. Like Putin thinks there's Russia proper that he has total control of. Although even there, actually, like if you look at Chechnya, let's say Kadyrov has the total control of Chechnya, and they have a deal where Kadyrov pronounces his loyalty 100% to Putin personally and more broadly to the regime, but he emphasizes Putin personally, and then he can do whatever he wants in Chechnya, and even outside when his interests are concerned, like if somebody tries to escape the Kadyrov regime and goes to a different part of Russia, Kadyrov's people can find the person and prosecute outside of any bounds of the law or whatever, and that's nobody talks about that. But in any case, there's like parts of the world, let's say, that he has total control of. Most of them are Russia itself. And then there's a sphere of influence, and I think Ukraine, he sees as I'm not gonna allow that to get away from my sphere of influence. While there are, former Soviet republics that like that we lost that, or like Finland used to be a part of the Russian Empire, but it's not there anymore, and he's not that attached to that. And then whatever happens on the other side of the world is gonna play a game, if there's a game to play. If there's a civil war in Syria and he can participate to the better of his interest, or the the way he sees it's like would be better to play a hand in that part, he can do that. But there's this like gradual dissipation of his power the further you go from the center. And I think Trump kind of, the way it seems to me, the way he talks about Ukraine is like, I wish this conflict would just be over and we could do business. And I don't care about who's right or who's wrong. Just figure it out. And with Israel, it seems to me, I don't know what your view of his behavior there, but it seems like there's no competition. Israel's winning. So why would I try to do anything with that situation? It's they're the dominant force there, and he wants to be the really dominant force in the hemisphere. He would like to have Canada as the 51st state, and it would be nice to buy Greenland. And in Mexico, things are not under control, so maybe we should use the American military to solve the cartel problem.
Yeah. I think, yeah, we're both buying into a spheres of influence philosophy. And I think what annoyed Putin about our Ukraine policy is that we didn't seem to respect that.
Yeah.
And now that is separate from kind of the question of international law, at least in the sense that you can maintain a sphere of influence while kind of going through the motions of complying with international law
Right.
and exert the influence in internationally legal ways. But what both Trump and Putin have now done is pretty much abandon that pretense. I mean, I don't know, Putin may claim that invading Ukraine was somehow consistent with international law. Trump certainly has no concern with international law at all. It's interesting that, in a way, it was America that started violating it before Russia did. There was a 2007 speech that Putin gave at the Munich Security Conference that's routinely misreported in the West as Putin having declared that he was abandoning the West or something. It's total bullshit. What he did was he complained that the U.S. was not complying with the UN Charter's ban on transborder aggression. And what he particularly had in mind was that NATO, without UN Security Council authorization, had bombed Serbia, had changed borders by force, because at that moment, I think we were trying to secure the actual independence of Kosovo, which amounted to changing borders by force, plainly illegal in international law. He was right. And at that point in 2007, Russia had not done anything comparable. Now, people get confused about this because Chechnya is sometimes described as an invasion. There are really a fair number of Americans who don't realize Chechnya is inside Russia.
Of course,
so
yeah.
you can call it a war, but it's a civil war. And the U.S. has been known to fight back against nationalist insurrections in the middle of the 19th century. You may recall. It's like governments always do, pretty much. And was he brutal? Did he violate human rights? I'm sure, yeah, but it was not a violation of the UN Charter. The fundamental core of the UN Charter about transborder aggression. And Putin really called attention to that. And he also, in 2007, in that same speech, laid down I forget how explicit he was, but a warning about NATO expansion. And he just said the U.S. is running roughshod over the landscape, and there's going to be blowback. It's like, if you keep this up, there's going to be blowback. He warned about NATO expansion. And I think only a couple of months after that, George Bush strong-armed reluctant European leaders into declaring that, yes, Ukraine would become a member of NATO, which was never going to happen probably, but they said it, and that set in motion a lot of things that kept driving Putin crazy. We could get into that. I'm not defending Putin. It was a clear violation of international law when he invaded Ukraine, but there's so much misunderstanding in America, I think, of how things went sour with Russia. I mean, and one thing that Americans commonly say is, yeah, we had high hopes for good relations with Russia, but then Putin took this authoritarian turn, or then the brutal thing with Chechnya happened. And from Putin's point of view, it's like, wait a second, national relations with another nation are about how you behave toward other nations, right? This was all internal. That's his view. But American foreign policy has tended to conflate the two. Like, since the Cold War, the idea has been, if you're going to be on good terms with us, in fully good standing, you have to emulate our form of government, or at least pay lip service and say you're becoming more democratic or something. And a lot of countries, notably China, do not view the world that way. And it's important that we at least understand that difference in perspective. And honestly, I think if we had understood it more clearly from the beginning, we might be in a much better place. But that's just this is a sermon regular listeners have heard before. But I'm wondering how it strikes you. You've kind of heard it before, but I've never, and I think you don't like it very much. You don't like my sermon, right?
I'm not sure. So if you listen to Putin today, he is pretty explicit. He's basically like in line with your sermon. He says it explicitly that his understanding of how the world works has evolved. And it started out with hope for good relationships. And he says that the way he says it now is like, listen, during the Soviet times and right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we thought that the reason for the Cold War and the reason for this hatred between two countries is ideological. And since the Soviet Union is no more and communism is not an ideology of the state, that's just gone now, and we're all going to be doing business together, and it's all going to be fine, and we're going to respect each other as equals. And then it took some time for him to catch up with the actual realities, the harsh realities of global politics, where it's not about that. It's great powers competing and whatnot. And he goes back to Kosovo a lot, this bombing that you're mentioning, as this example. Yeah, you talk about a rule-based order. What are the rules? Who came up with the rules? Where are they written down? Because the international law, as far as like the UN Charter, it doesn't seem to be applied, right? So what rules? You came up with rules yourself, you changed them on a whim. And so if that's how it's going to be, that's how it's going to be. So we're going to throw the gloves away as well, kind of. Is his rhetoric, I mean, maybe I'm like putting a little more emphasis on, like, it doesn't say, that's how it is. Though actually he might, but it's that line of argument. I don't know how sincere he is when he says it, whether he did have hopes on that, and whether he has like respect. Like, he often talks about respect towards, like I told you, everything has to be within the bounds of the law. I know when it's applied domestically, that's bullshit. That's, it's not that he's a lawyer that's concerned with the law. He's broken his own laws many times and then changed them. And the Constitution is part of those laws that were broken. Whether he hoped for a more robust system of international law that he would be willing to comply with more than he is now, maybe. Yeah, maybe. But who knows?
Yeah, I don't know that it was a governing ideal of his, but I feel sure that once the U.S. started bombing Serbia, he thought, hey, that would be kind of nice if that didn't happen, right? I mean, once his own, once it was applied, because they considered Serbia hadn't been part of the Warsaw Pact, but he considered it vaguely within the Russian sphere of influence. And the funny thing is, when we expanded NATO, we said, you have nothing to worry about, okay? This isn't, it's not going to be a threat to you. And the first actual, outside of Bosnia, I guess, well, and that was in Bosnia. But so the first, but besides, the Bosnia campaign by NATO had UN authorization. So the first flatly illegal act of aggression by NATO is actually in what he considers his sphere of influence. So yeah, it was not the best way to get off on the right foot with him. And of course, Milosevic was a brutal dictator. None of this is deny any of that. On the other hand, if you look at how things have played out in Kosovo and Serbia, we still haven't brought stability and peace there enduringly, and we killed a bunch of civilians in Serbia, including in some specific ways that we indict Russia for in Ukraine, like bombing power plants with the expressed purpose of immiserating a civilian population that we say should then put pressure on its government or something. Anyway, so we've once I've started doing my rerun sermons, it's time to change subject. We should. It's been about an hour, so we should talk a little about Nonzero, and I guess we should. Normally, we're behind a paywall by now, available to Nonzero's paid subscribers only. But what do you think this time, Nikita? Should we just keep the whole thing
sure
open?
Let's do it. More people will see it.
So, yeah, I don't even know where to start. We haven't talked about what we're going to say. What are we going to say? Last time That was Connor Eccles' last appearance as a as a Nonzero team member, because he's gone to the Quincy Institute to Responsible Statecraft. And you're going to be filling kind of some of his shoes, both behind the scenes and in some ways more visibly. And what I said at that point was a few things. And one thing I said was, actually, why don't I shut up and let you? Why don't I let you talk about how you see the where we're heading, and I'll get around to saying everything I would have said now had I not graciously yielded the stage to you.
So I was thinking of a segue between the previous topic and what you're integrating now, and the segue would be to talk about national identity and the nation state, and where that would lead us to is the project of community building or identity building or movement building with the Nonzero audience. So trying to turn the audience into more of a network or community, or we can use different words, but like people who consider to each other as part of their let's say network. So on the surface level, it just means, for example, we've talked about maybe doing more call-in shows, a live stream, and people can call in and we talk with them, so they become contributors to the media side of things. But then it can evolve in many different directions, and one is this like, okay, so the way I pitched it to you, one of the ways I pitched it to you is we can frame it ambitiously. We can say that the prevalent identity forming force in the world today is the nation state. So much so, it's almost hard to imagine to not have an identity attached to your country. Like somebody's not Russian, not American, not anything, and that is my understanding is a pretty new phenomenon. Like there was a time when just a few centuries ago when people thought of their religion, maybe village, or even loyalty to a king, but a king is like a person, he has a family, and not this like expansive millions of people together as your people. And some people say that force is in crisis. The nation state itself is in crisis, or at least a bunch of them are struggling with their own identity. And then on individual level, I mean, I particularly, I have a connection to my country and to my people, but I'm outside of that country, as many Russians are. And the relationship is not an easy one. I'm contemplating like visiting, and then I don't know whether I should, because I read the news and there's another person who got like 8 years for donating $500 to a Ukrainian foundation. And I think there are a lot of people who are in different ways alienated from their country or society, or have a complicated relationship with it. And it's not written anywhere that there has to be just one of those, that you should consider yourself a part of this tribe to the exclusion of every other tribe. And so my kind of pitch is like, listen, we are already some kind of network. We are connected. The people who listen to Nonzero, who read Nonzero, who exchange comments in the comment section, have something in common. There's a sensibility, worldview, maybe even a sense of humor. There are things that are not made very explicit that make that highlight some affinity between these people, and they're all over the world. And so why not see if we can build something more from that, to establish more of a relationship between these different members of the audience, and as I say, like treat them less of an audience, less as an audience, and more as nodes in a network.
Yeah.
So that's my,
Yeah.
and then see whether that, whether more of a project can appear out of that. So the printing press gave us the nation state. An argument goes. Now we have the internet. Maybe it'll give us a new form of organization that is going to be important, and maybe we are already a part of that organization. We just haven't made it more explicit and influential and alive.
Yeah. Which isn't to say that, well, the internet will create, a single global identity. I mean, quite the contrary. The internet,
Hmm.
like the printing press, makes it practical to form tribes along narrower lines than had been the case. I mean, the printing press allowed Martin Luther to produce these essays that were distributed to a subset of Catholics uh, who were not totally happy with where the church was, and became less so by virtue of reading his stuff. And before that, when scribes had to, everything had to be written by scribes. The Catholic Church had kind of a monopoly on written stuff. The internet famously takes things even more narrowly. You can form the most obscure. The costs are so low of reaching people, and reaching them in more powerful ways, instantaneously, with video and so on. That you can form very narrow tribes. At the same time, they can be international and global now in a way
Hmm.
that used to be much harder. And by the way, we're entering this fascinating threshold with AI where translation can be instantaneous. I mean, I'll probably have a smartphone within 6 months that can do that if I follow through on my aspiration to get a Google Pixel. Um, and So yeah, that's kind of the technological setting. The personal setting includes the fact that you and I both were born in countries that we do not think are playing a very constructive role in the world right now. I mean, I think that about my country. You thinking about your country. We probably, to some extent, thinking about each other's countries.
Yeah,
And
I was about to add.
in general, um, I also just hold the belief that if you look at just the policy challenges alone that the world needs to deal with, yeah, including climate change, but bioweapons, biotechnology, AI certainly, and of course, remember nuclear weapons and a bunch of stuff. The current international system is just not working, and it's not within our power to restructure the entire international political system. But I do think one piece of the puzzle is thinking about forms of identity that could play a constructive role, right? Like, just to my mind, that would include not starting off with the assumption that wherever you happen to have been born really is a super special place. Of course, it's special in distinctive ways. It's the only country that's X, Y, Z, and so on, but it's not better than other countries just because you were born there. And it's the value system associated with it should not go unexamined just because you were born there. Especially if the value system seems to be on a rapid downhill slide, as I think is the case in America. So yeah, we would like the whole like Nonzero platform to be a place for discussing this, and even
Hmm.
ultimately for experimenting with it and making some of it happen, so that like uh what it means to be a member of our community uh is part of this experiment at a minimum. I mean,
Yeah,
uh which, by the way, there is a distinction between community and audience. I don't discourage anyone from being in the audience,
sure.
but
Yeah.
there's also such thing as a closer, more interactive relationship. And I don't just mean like interactive with us. I mean interactive with each other, and that's community, is when you're engaged with other people. And I would like the community part of Nonzero, and there has long been some kind of community part. I mean, we have the paid subscribers, the members, and there's a comment section, which is in the newsletter has generally been open only to the members. And there's this and there's that, and we have these every once in a while YouTube conversations,
Hmm.
where which have been, those have been kind of confined to paid subscribers. There have been forms of community, but I don't feel they've really crystallized. And again, I'm not saying they should crystallize only along a single line. I think we should fool around and see what works and what people want to do. But broadly speaking, I think we've outlined the parameters within which we'd like to see the experimentation take place, if that's not too vague.
Yeah, I kind of see it as more discover than create. I guess it's, they go hand in hand, but the discover part is important to me. That is, these people already exist. It's by meeting people that
Right.
you find
Right.
out what you have in common, what you don't have in common, and it might be something else than what you have in mind originally. I did this experiment like early on after leaving Russia when I was in Armenia, and I want to start doing it again, by the way, of doing like allowing people, subscribers to Psychopolitica, to just book a conversation with me privately on Zoom. And the
Uh-huh.
thought was, I want to find out who my audience is. Like, I get an email occasionally and I might exchange some emails, but it's not the same as talking to a person. And it was such an incredible and totally surprising experience. Like, I've had, I don't know, more than a dozen of these conversations. And I can't describe who these people are, but they do have something in common. Like, I don't know
Mhm.
what it is that they have in common, but I have a sense of connection. Uh, with most of them, it felt like there's something kind of special here. And I want to see what happens if we do things like that at Nonzero and just establish these bridges between people and see whether there's a project that we would get on together. One of the themes we're talking about kind of behind the scenes is AI and what use cases are there, what is the most effective and interesting way to use AI. That's a conversation that can be had with the group. Like, everybody's
Mhm.
figuring out what to do with ChatGPT. Everybody's using ChatGPT, not everybody, but a lot of people, but in ways that they kind of came up with. We could just share those, and then maybe the next step is there's like a Nonzero app or something. And what that is, what it does, why there needs to be one, is all subject to conversation and uh, you know collaborative
Mhm.
interaction of different kinds.
And there's the question of how AI can be used to transcend kind of the psychology of tribalism. I mean, AI is going to have tribalizing tendencies, much like social media had, if you think about it, and
Hmm.
it's also going to have these like just controlling tendencies, like the company wants your engagement, and it's going to be a very powerful tool of influence and persuasion. And I would like to, a term I saw somewhere was cognitive sovereignty,
Yeah, I like
just
that.
developing a certain amount of, a way to be maintain your independent, your independence, your autonomy, notwithstanding the fact that you're going to be using AI probably if you're like most people, um, and maybe even use it in ways that could cultivate that sovereignty. That's possible. That is certainly possible. It's just not what the market may naturally do. Um, so just that whole discussion can be part of this, like wholesome ways to use AI, unwholesome ways to use AI. And then, as you say, we may integrate, we will definitely integrate AI in some ways into our workings. And to the extent that it's involved in content production, we'll be transparent about that. But also, as you said, maybe we'll come up with something that's useful for people, for Nonzero readers, listeners, members. But yeah, and we'll see what people are interested in, what works. We have something of an international group already. If you look at where readers of the newsletter come from, and that's good. And one thing I want to do, okay, so you and I want to try some live streams. I also hope to put together some discussion groups, like people who are subscribers, whatever, and are interested in, I don't know, a movie, a book, an issue, a movie that speaks to the kinds of things we're talking about, and get together and have a virtual discussion of 6 or 12 people or whatever,
Yeah.
like a book club.
Yeah. The two could be combined, by the way. You could stream, a short movie or something, and then have a discussion about it. And
Yeah.
the whole thing is, there are now tools that allow that to be done pretty easily and seamlessly and comfortably. So there's a lot to experiment with. Yeah. And I'm curious about.
Yeah.
I want to ask you some question about the nation state is one term. You can say nation, you can say culture. I'm not sure how to phrase the question and what exactly I mean, but I guess, like, what is your relationship to, how do you feel today about your Americanness, and how you, like, so there's the country, like a political entity, a state, I guess I could say. And then there's the people, like in Armenia, when I was, Armenians are talkative. So if you walk the dog, you're going to have a bunch of conversation with people. And one old man told me a line that stuck with me. I mean, of course, at the time, many of these conversations is about the war and Russia and what's going on. And they have their own situation with Azerbaijan, or as Trump calls it, Azerbaijan. Have you seen this when he's talking about... Let me play this for you, because I've got this clip just in case. It's 15 seconds. And we're also going to just see how this StreamYard thing works. This is from Mark, is it Mark Levin's show.
A lot of amazing things. You saw the Azerbaijan. That was a big one going on for 34, 35 years with Albania. Think of that. I mean, going on for years.
So
wait, he said Albania?
Yes, he stopped the war between Azerbaijan and Albania.
One of those countries doesn't exist, and the other country is the one that the country meant to refer to when he articulated the name that doesn't exist, was not at war with. But anyway, aside from that, he nailed it.
So this old Armenian man told me Kremlin is not Russia. And it's and in general, these in these like small talk kind of conversations in Armenia, people were very good at distinguishing between the people and the political entity of the country. What the country does and what the people who live there are separate things, and people don't always have the power to change the course of the country. And the relationship between those two, the relationship between me and my country is one thing. The relationship between me and my people, quote unquote, is a different thing. The relationship between me and my language and my culture, Russian literature or whatever, or music, is another thing. The connection I have with actual people in my life, most of my close friends are Russians, almost all of them. There's a reason for that. We share something in common. So again, I don't know how to phrase the question, but what do you think about all that? Like this kind of identity, a national identity, is not all bad.
No, I mean,
what do you think?
We all need a tribe. I mean, it's funny. One of the brands we've kind of fooled around with. I mean, brand is. I don't like the term brand, especially in this context. But one of the terms we've fooled around with is tribeless tribe for the kind of identity you might try to build. And I still have that Twitter handle. Should we ever go with that? But the we need tribes, and there are totally innocuous tribes. You can be a Boston Red Sox fan, and there's something to be said for a national tribe, particularly in light of the fact that for the time being, nations are essential units of political interaction. I mean, they're the ones that have the armies. There's just a lot of things about them that demand that if the world moves forward on fronts it needs to move forward on, nation states are going to be the relevant units of negotiation and cooperation, and I hope not violent conflict. But so I'm not against that kind of tribe, but it's like, Boston Red Sox fans, great tribe. I don't think these days they're much under the illusion that they are better people than, Yankees fans, maybe actually. I mean, there are regional differences between Boston and New York, I suppose. But anyway, that the nation state, it really becomes a big deal in kind of the 19th century as these European nation states consolidate. And two things were happening that were done with that both kind of required the printing press is what had been significant local variations of dialect were paved over within what became a nation state. There had been more of a continuous gradation of linguistic difference often. And you pave over the differences, within a certain region, and then that becomes the nation state, and it has more of a sense of common culture, and that is intentionally cultivated, with poetry, national mythology, and so on. And when you think about it, it's kind of a remarkable thing that it could happen. The scholar Benedict Anderson used the phrase "imagined communities." The idea that, I've never, most Americans I've never met, but I do have this sense that they're in something with me. We're both involved in something together, and it's kind of an amazing development. Now, the nation state is different from nationalism. Nationalism is the sentiment that facilitates the sense of cohesion of a nation state. I mean, that's one way you could define nationalism, and it can get out of hand. And unfortunately, it is often in the interests of political leaders to make it get out of hand. And by get out of hand, I mean just seriously distort people's perception of what's going on. It's like the view in America of China and America is very different from the view in China of China and America. They can't both be right. And remarkably, a lot of people on both sides think, well, we're the ones who are right and they're entirely wrong, or something like that, right? And I just have bad news for you. You are significantly wrong about a lot of things if you buy into your nation's kind of official view of the world. That's not equally true of all nations, but to the extent that nations are involved in these power struggles and conflicts, those tend to entail a systematic distortion of perception. And so that's the part you want to transcend. And if creating a certain kind of tribe can help people transcend that in a constructive way, without exiting the whole system of discourse, you want people to play a constructive role in the world and in politics if they're politically inclined. But if we can think of ways to create a community that manages to transcend some of the less fortunate aspects of national identity, and not all are unfortunate, that would be great.
Is there do you see some kind of a project or is competition for what the American identity is right now, like with Trump and with MAGA and with Project 25 and the other side? Like I've weirdly become a listener of Tucker Carlson. Never expected that to happen in my life, but somehow I ended
Well, he's
up.
had some good guests. I mean, I just taped a
Yeah.
podcast with Seth Harp, who wrote this book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, and he was on the Tucker Carlson show first. That'll be on our feed next week. But go ahead.
So like I'm starting to get a little bit of an understanding of his worldview that I think is not just his, but he like represents some kind of a tribe, let's say.
Mhm.
And I feel like there are competing ideas of what being an American is, and he's like big on how long have your family been here kind of line.
Yeah.
And my, again, maybe it's from American movies that I watched as a kid or something, my sense has always been that it's kind of a political nation. Like I always thought if you go to America and settle and become a citizen, it's within the idea of the country. Like that's the premise of what's going on there, that you really are no different from anybody else. Whereas like
Mhm.
if you move to Germany and integrate and do all the things, you're still not German. You're, an immigrant to Germany who became a German citizen, but you're not what they call Bio-Deutsch. But in America, I always thought, there's the Constitution that binds this thing together and a set of ideals, and not lineage. So my
Yeah.
question is there something happening with the American identity? Is there a competition for what being American means?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you're right. The idea has been. I mean, two ideas have been characteristic of the American self-conception. One is your lineage plays less of a role in your status than in, say, Britain. Okay, everyone deserves a certain kind of respect. Anyone can reach the highest, blah blah
Mm-hmm.
blah, regardless of the empirical truth of that last one. But that's been part of it. And then yes, this idea of the melting pot that people from everywhere come here and they become Americans. Now, there has been in the melting pot idea this idea that there's melting, right? Like they learn to speak English, blah, blah, blah. And part of the pushback from some of the Tucker Carlsons of the world is like, I don't want to go to my bank teller machine and have to push a button telling it I want to speak English. And but yeah, that's been part of the American dream. I want to actually. This is a good opportunity to say something else, which is I want to emphasize when we talk about community formation in non-zero land. I'm not just talking about transcending the pernicious aspects of national identity. There are pernicious aspects of intranational political identity, including the red and blue tribes in America right now, both of
Mm-hmm.
which I think tend to be prey to a number of misperceptions of the other. And there is, and it's the same psychological forces at work. Whenever tribalism has these pernicious influences, it's kind of the same set of challenges. And by the way, that's you can imagine in non-zero land a community forming around something like mindfulness meditation, because I think that's very well suited to eroding the psychology of tribalism. And but I wanted to emphasize there's all kinds of bad tribes out there, or all kinds of bad aspects of tribal psychology, even though in all of these cases, the idea of a tribe along those bounds isn't inherently terrible. It's fine for there to
Mm-hmm.
be two parties, multiple political parties, distinct political parties, distinct nations. There are just certain expressions of that you would like to contain. So,
Amen. Yeah.
so I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just throw a short thing. Since my time in Armenia, I've become like an Armenian evangelist. Every conversation, if it lasts long enough, I'm gonna say something nice about Armenians. And on this
Good, because you've already said they talk too much. No, you didn't put it quite that much. You said they talk a lot. Go ahead.
I've very much enjoyed that. One thing, I mean, there's a lot of, so in these conversations with random people in the streets or taxi drivers or whatever, they're gonna say good things about Armenia. They're gonna show their pride, and some of these are, it gets a little funny because everybody wants to tell you how something was invented by an Armenian, or did you know that share actually has Armenian roots? Something. But the other thing that is often mentioned that struck me as like, this is the kind of thing you really should be proud about as a people, is safety in the streets. Like Armenia ranks very, very high in just safety in the streets. And I don't think there's an explicit like reason in terms of like organization of the state. It's not like they had it was bad and then they reformed the police in a certain way, or there was this program or that program. It seems to just be the case. It's just they're kind people or something, or for some reason it just happened.
So you mean there's low crime generally? I mean, you don't just mean like pedestrians getting hit by cars. You mean crime?
They might be actually ranking higher on that. The driving is a little intense, but yeah, the crime levels in the street, yeah.
Okay.
But my point is, when a person tells me that with a pride in their voice, I feel like that's deserved, because that is something that's achieved, and achieved by the group, right? No one Armenian is the reason that's the case, and you're not claiming pride for something that somebody else invented who happens to be from your tribe, or an achievement from a previous generation, or something along those lines. It is a thing that, if it so happens that as a group you have a quality, and that quality is something like that, there's not a lot of crime in the streets, that is something I think that you can be legitimately proud of as a member of a group.
And Americans have things they can be proud of, and I will think of them and mention them next time. No, it's been a great country. I mean, the America I remember is great. It's like changing fast, and it's hard to keep. It's hard to know what has really changed and what hasn't. But it's when change happens this fast. I mean, like, I'm obviously a lot older than you. As people get older, they often have more trouble relating to just the current reality. So I don't know how much of it is that. For all I know, kids today are great. So anyway, look, we've got a meeting with the whole team in 15 minutes, so we should get off. But people should stay tuned. Before very long, as I said, we're going to try some live streaming. Before very long at all, we're going to have a meeting with paid subscribers of Nonzero newsletter to become informed about that and all other developments. I encourage people to become subscribers to the Nonzero newsletter, which you can do for free. I mean, most subscribers aren't paid, and that's perfectly respectable position to be while it lasts, which I hope will not be long. I hope you'll eventually be converted to our rapacious, or what is that? Revenue generation program. But no, we have, what do we have? I guess 52,000 subscribers. Certainly a large majority of those are not paid, and they're living happily and living fulfilling lives. So we encourage everybody to become one of those, and you'll get news about what's up next. Nikita, is there anything else we should say about what's up next?
Well, first I wanted to add to what you said just now. If what we've talked about so far generates an idea or thought, or you think, here's what I would like to see or what I want to participate in, let us know, right in the comments, or send an email, or let us know in whatever way is convenient.
Yeah. Let's make a point. There will be a post, although most people imbibe this kind of content either on YouTube or via the podcast feed. Let's make a point on the post. There's always a post associated with the podcast at the newsletter at nonzero.org. And let's make a point of keeping the comments on that open to everybody for this one, for this episode. Normally they are confined to paid subscribers. And let's also say that there is a way to email us. I'm trying to think. It's at the newsletter. I don't want to give you the wrong one. I think it's nonzero.news@gmail.com. Am I wrong?
I think that's probably true.
You're rejoining the team after a long hiatus, so you can't be expected to know.
I think that's the right address. But also, if you are a subscriber and you receive the newsletter, you can hit reply, and that will that email will get into that inbox as well.
There you go. So I hope everybody will stick around and see what happens. I guarantee you new stuff will. And thanks, Nikita.
Thanks, Bob.
Let's go work some more.